Welcome to the Herpcore History podcast, presented to you by lilsshopofhorrors. Feel free to reach out to us on any of our social media platforms for any of your feeder needs. All right, let's go ahead and get into this episode. All right, today I am joined by Seth Hoffpauir from Huff's Herps. How's it going, man? Thanks for being here.
It's going. How's it going, Lewis? Thanks for having me.
It's going good. Just a long day of cleaning and rats, and now I get to do this, the fun part. So I enjoy it.
Hell yeah.
Excellent. So where'd you grow up at?
A little bit of everywhere, but we spent most of our time in central Oklahoma, just southwest Oklahoma City.
Okay.
Uh, so yeah, that's where I was at from like first grade to sixth grade. So that's where I spent most of my childhood and always called home.
Gotcha.
Um,
And what was early on when what got you into reptiles?
well, there in Oklahoma, well, first of all, like whenever I was younger than that, I was always a dinosaur nut. That was a given. And then whenever we lived in Oklahoma, whenever we moved to Oklahoma, I was in first grade. I think I was just starting first grade. And I don't know if you ever been to Oklahoma in the springtime, but there's box turtles everywhere, dude. Like everywhere, everywhere. And so um, my mom would keep a little cardboard box in the van, and she would quote unquote rescue them. Now as a more avid reptile enthusiast, I understand that we were not doing those turtles any good by taking them out of their habitat. But she would collect them for me every spring, and so I would end up with 10, 12, 13, 14 box turtles. I had this big kiddie pool. To be fair, I did have them set up pretty cool. I had a big kiddie pool in the backyard that was like half full of like potting soil and dirt and stuff, and then I had a big water dish in the center and all kind of hides and stuff made for them. And it wasn't the most amazing setup looking back on it. I wasn't probably giving them the best diet possible, but I wasn't doing a bad job for a 10-year-old. And that's what I would do every year. I would collect them all year and keep them and take care of them and feed them, and we'd race them and all kind of stuff. And then in the fall, when it was starting to cool off, we lived on 5 acres on a big horse pasture, and so I would just let them go in my pasture in the fall, and they'd go brumate. And sometimes I would even find the same ones the next year in the pasture. Um, so that was pretty cool. That was definitely a cool entry to my reptile keeping. But I was never allowed to have any reptiles inside. My dad was afraid of snakes, or is afraid of snakes, and so I always just had my turtles outside. That's all I was able to have. And, so that was kind of the beginning of it all, I guess.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, that
And
makes
I
sense.
still have box turtles to this day. I've always had box turtles. So
Very cool. Very cool. I didn't know you kept box turtles. I like that.
I do. I have a pair of adults, and then I have a few of their babies of various ages that are here and there.
That's very cool. That's very cool. Well, and then, I think that's one of the coolest aspects about reptiles is they are in your backyard, right? And just how cool to be able to keep those and set that up and kind of start to nurture that, and your mom to support that and see it and go, hey, be a part of it.
Oh, dude, it's such a cool experience. And I remember one of the most vivid experiences that I had was, so my best friend Casey lived in town and I lived out in the country, and it was kind of a team effort, right? And so sometimes we would keep turtles at his place, like temporarily, until we made him out, till we brought him out to my place. And he had like a big like tractor tire sandbox in his backyard, and so we would just put him in there for a couple days until we got him to my place. And one year we were in his backyard playing in that sandbox, and I remember this like it was yesterday. We were playing Army, and I was digging a trench for my Army men, and I was using a rake, like a little hand rake, and I caught an egg and pulled out this baby turtle, dude. And apparently, one of the turtles that we had temporarily stored there for a little bit had laid a clutch. And so I accidentally broke the egg, and so we had to prematurely hatch this turtle, and it ended up living, and I
Oh,
had
wow.
it for a long time. Um, and it ended up not making it eventually, but it lived for several years, and we had that whole clutch hatch, and we let all of them go except for the couple that we kept. Um, but it that was a really cool experience looking back on it, you know.
Yes, sir. Yeah. No, and how integral to kind of where you end up at, and also extreme early egg cutting. That's a
Yeah.
my first egg I ever cut.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. And
That's
I remember it was so traumatic, dude. Like once I realized what it was and what I had done, I was so beside myself. I was like, "Oh my God, I killed it. I killed it." And we ended up getting it to live for a while. Um,
yeah.
but
No,
yeah.
that's so cool. And so it sounds like, having those early box turtle experiences and getting to do that, that was definitely maybe fundamental in where you ended up. When did you start keeping other animals, or is there anything in between that and you starting to keep reptiles that's really kind of, or more different species, however you want to look at it? Um,
Um, yeah, so whenever we moved to Colorado when I was in middle school, I finally got my first indoor reptile was an iguana that my parents finally let me have. I'd been begging and begging and begging for a snake, but they didn't want me to have a snake, or my dad didn't want me to have a snake, so they settled for an iguana. So we bought this 4-year-old, 4 foot female iguana that was living in a 110-gallon aquarium. If it was that big, it might have even no. I lied, dude. She was in like a 55 tall, bro. She was miserable. Okay.
yes,
And
sir.
so we bought this iguana, and they bought me. To my parents' credit, they hooked me up on this one. They got me a 4 foot it was 4 feet deep, 6 feet tall, and 8 feet long. It was a big, huge. The guy that built it had a Burmese python, I think, and he was a carpenter, and so it was really well built. It had a like a full 2x4 window in it, and then a 2x4 door right next to it. It was a really cool enclosure. I wish I had held on to that all these years, but it was quite a bit. But anyway, once we moved her in there, she was a whole different lizard, dude. Instantly changed overnight, and ended up being a really cool iguana that I had for a long time.
Yeah. I think as time has gone on, I really am starting to appreciate how cool a green iguana is.
Dude, they're so underrated and so over, you know, they were oversaturated, obviously, and poorly represented. But yeah, they she had an amazing personality, dude. She only trusted and liked me. She would whip the hell out of anybody else. And like, but she would climb off of her perch and come and climb up onto my chest, like from the ground. It was crazy. So yeah, so that was my first indoor reptile was Iggy, and I had her for years and years. She traveled all over with me, and we ended up. I lost her in a snowstorm. Her cage was set up really cool, but her breaker tripped. I had the inexperience of only having everything all on one like surge protector, and I lost I lost her in a really bad cold event one night.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
she was I think 14 or 15 years old whenever I lost her. She was old, dude. Um, I'm not sure what the average lifespan of a green iguana is, but she was definitely up there.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure either. But if you think, again, back to it, where early on, right, that it was a very, I don't know what green iguanas are going for nowadays, but that was a very cheap, 14.99 lizard.
Hmm.
And people come in and go, oh, I want a 10-gallon for it. And that, and,
Yeah,
and I'm
dude.
sure that a lot of those didn't make it to see that and to get to experience that. Very cool. And again, just such a super impressive animal as I've gotten older and realized how cool they are.
No, they really are cool, and definitely underrated and not appreciated as much as they should be. But anyway, that was my first indoor reptile, and then I got a snake, which I still have the snake. I got a snake when I was 14, um, and I still have her. She's, I guess, 27, 28 years old now. I'm 41, so I don't know, do the math. Um, and it was just kind of a snowball from there, man. I worked at a pet store whenever I was in high school for like, I don't know, 2 or 3 years for the last couple of years of high school and right out of high school. And I was like the reptile guy, you know. I had a briefcase full of reptiles magazines and pretty much I was the encyclopedia of anybody that was coming in looking for information about anything, you know. I took care of both stores, all the reptile stuff eventually. And it was something that definitely I was thriving at, you know, as far as enjoying it and doing a good job with it, you know. So that was definitely kind of the beginning of my career in it.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, kind of, those are what, if you don't, what was the name of the pet shop? And,
Oh, it was I don't even know if they're still open. It was called Durrell's. It was in Lafayette, Louisiana, and they had one in the mall, and then they had another one like in a little shopping center was like the original one. And I worked at the one in the mall for several years, and it was crazy, man. It was good training for the reptile expos that I do now because it was just like an expo. You had thousands of people a day walking through that store, and literally maybe 10% of them were actually trying to buy something. You know, most people, when you go to the mall, or when they had reptile shops in a mall, when you went to the mall, everybody went to the reptile, or not reptile shops, but pet stores. You know, everybody would go to the pet store. Even if you weren't getting anything, you go look at all the animals, right? Um, and so it was definitely a decent experience there as far as just dealing with a lot of people all day that were just coming to look at stuff, you know, if that makes sense.
yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. It almost seems like there's anyway, discussion for another time. Yeah, no, but that is pretty interesting because you don't see pet shops at malls anymore, and kind of what a
No, that's the thing of the past,
different, yeah. I mean, what a different time in history that was, and just how the world was at that point.
for sure.
Yeah. What was
I mean,
some
dude,
of?
we were selling all kind of puppies in that pet store. That's how long ago this was. We had like a whole room of Maltese and Shih Tzu and English bulldogs and poorly bred labs. All these dogs that were probably just coming straight out of backyard breeder puppy mills. Man, it was so. Uh, but again, another day for sure.
Yes, sir. Yeah, it's so interesting how just people have become more educated over time to animals, and something that early on working at pet shops and kind of getting to see some of the people coming in, there's so much more knowledge out there now, and you see people taking advantage of that, and also just equipment that we had available. It
Oh
used to
yeah,
be here's a heat pad with a stick on thermometer, and that's the right best way to do it, and it's it'll suffice.
yep,
And but it's just so funny where it's like that, and that was peak, that was
yeah.
like,
And as far as exact timing, this was like late 90s, I guess. It was like 98, 99, 2000, 2001 ish is probably the time the time that I was working here at this pet store. So yeah, it was definitely a different era for sure than what we have now.
yes sir, yeah. And what were some of the, what kind of what kind of reptiles were they bringing in at that point?
Well, we had obviously leopard geckos, and lots. I can remember lots of Burmese pythons, lots of baby Burmese, dude. That was like nonstop selling baby Burmese pythons for like $100 a piece. Um, most, the common stuff, green iguanas, of course. Not as many of those though. I think it was starting to be the beginning of people realizing that that was kind of not the greatest starter pet for people. Um, We had some emeralds in there one time. I got bit by an emerald in there, dude. It was the gnarliest bite I've ever had in my life. Still to this day. It sucked so bad, bro. I was cleaning their cage and I had these big welding gloves that I would use when I would mess with them. And I was taking I think it was the male. I was taking him out, and he started cruising up the glove. And I was kind of in a position with my inexperience where I didn't really know what to do to be able to maneuver him to, and I didn't have a hook. That was my first mistake. And this this snake, as soon as he got to the edge of my glove, dude, I saw him totally just sense my temperature change when he got to my skin. He opened it was like slow motion, dude. He opened his mouth and sunk all four teeth into my forearm, dude. Like slow motion, just open, bite, and then let go. It was such a weird thing. Like, especially looking back on it now and knowing how snakes act, like it wasn't a fear bite. It wasn't a mistaken identity. It was like, hey, dude, I can do this, and I'm doing it. Like it was
Gotcha.
so deliberate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sucked. But anyway, we had all kind of the run of the mill stuff that was going through the pet trade at that time. Ball pythons, obviously, that's where I fell in love with them whenever I got my original ball pythons. Um, Fat tail geckos, we had just the wild caughts at that time. There wasn't any morphs at all at that time. This was, early 2000s. And
Yes,
I
sir.
think the morphs of I think the fat tail morphs first started coming in like 2008-ish is whenever those started rolling in. Um, not to the pet stores, but to the trade in general. That's when they first started importing the visuals. Um, yeah, lots of your basic stuff, man. I can remember a lot of Brazilian rainbow boas going through there. Pac-Man
What?
frog.
Yeah. Well, too, to unpack some of that, right? Like, I'm not sure about how, where you guys were getting your ball pythons and stuff from, but when I was younger and we were getting ball pythons in, the guy that was importing would come into the shop and he'd be like, "Oh yeah, I just landed today." And like, "Here are bags I got." And we would open up bags and go through it, and what a cool experience as a reptile just enthusiast in general, to sit there and get to look at hundreds of examples of one species.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know
I
what?
was I was a little bit further down the line on that. I remember we would order. My boss would just give me a list from I don't even know who we were ordering from, probably Backwater or some you know fairly illegitimate company these days. And I was able to have some input on the orders as far as the non-random, the more random stuff. For example, I was able to order some Solomon Island tree boas one day for like $8 a piece, dude. And I told her, I was like, if I save one of these, you're gonna make your money back. And so she let me get like a dozen of them, and I saved like eight of them. But they were hatchling Solomon Island tree boas, dude. They were like the size of a freaking phone charging cord, basically,
Yeah.
um, diameter.
I mean,
Uh,
what a cool species, and then how did it end up there? And it's just so interesting the
dude,
path that those took.
dude, and one of my biggest regrets of my whole reptile keeping is I kept one of them. I kept the coolest looking one, and it ended up I grew it out to it was probably about a foot long, maybe. And the cage I was keeping it in, again, in my inexperience, I was using like a wet towel on top of the cage to keep it humid enough for this species, and the screen ended up rusting out because of the way I was keeping it, and it formed a little hole in one of the corners, and the snake escaped, and obviously, no doubt, I'm sure perished inside the house, or if it got out, it didn't last long. Um, but yeah, I never found it. That was,
Yeah.
and she was so cool looking, dude. It was the more rare looking ones that are like the white with the kind of rusty markings on it. Oh, she was so cool. Anyway,
Yes, yeah. Well, those are those early life lessons you learn,
yeah,
and
dude. Yeah.
so early on, I mean, so a couple things here, but who were your mentors? Where were you learning your knowledge from? Was it people you met? Was it online? Or
It was all. I really didn't have a in-person mentor. I was mostly self-educating from Reptiles magazines. It was kind of pre not pre-internet, but pre mainstream internet. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Um, I guess King Snake might have been around at that point. I'm not sure, but I wasn't part of that part of the industry at all. Keep in mind, I was still very young. I was in high school, dude.
Yes, sir.
Um,
Yeah.
so I was just kind of going with the flow as far as working at the pet store. Um, but yeah, I was pretty much just reading and reading and reading. I was nonstop reading Reptiles magazines. That's what I learned most of my stuff from was from Reptiles magazines.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
I
Great
had a
resource.
legit briefcase that was like I don't know 10 inches thick that was just loaded with them. So and I kind of had a pretty good inventory in my head of what was in each one. So if somebody came in and asked about a certain species, I could within a few minutes kind of find what they were looking for, and show them the article and be like, here, read this. Um, so yeah, that was probably my biggest, if I'm gonna say mentor, it would be Reptiles magazines, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, what a good resource when you think about, not to skip ahead, but just to think about where we are now, where, anybody can make a Facebook post or a comment or a website or however, right? And there's a lot of mixed signals on the right way to do things, or it's a very messy ecosystem now for it. And when you think about the purity of something like reptiles, where before that there was just absolutely nothing, and then local snake groups, and then to have something even like reptiles, well, that is basic, but it's a filtered, you're getting someone that knows what they're talking about, how to do it.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah, no, very interesting, very interesting, and to have the want to go out and get that knowledge, right? That's I'm sure there's many an early pet store supervisor that just didn't right didn't go deep into reptiles magazines.
Oh, dude, whenever I started there, they barely had any reptiles section going on at all. Like it was pretty pitiful. It was your average pitiful like reptiles section in the average pet store. And I took over the mall, that section at the mall and started rocking and rolling with that. And then it got to where I was going to do like I was going to both stores and taking care of the reptiles, just going to the other store just to take care of the reptiles. I wasn't doing any customer or anything like I would at the mall. I was just going there, knock out their reptile, rat, they had one of those big like 12 cage systems that everything's basically connected, like the most horrible mite prevention in the world. Um, and so I would just go knock out everything and feed and clean everybody, and then move on back to the other store. It was just part of my routine. But yeah, I don't remember where I was going with that.
No, good. And what was your collection looking like at that point? It sounds like you broke down your father and he caved in and you
Oh
took over
well,
your room.
at this point, I'm living by myself. I moved out whenever I was like 17. I moved out on my own with a buddy of mine. It was kind of a weird situation. My parents were already divorced, and my mom was moving because of a new job she had got, and so I had the decision of either moving with her and changing high schools again, which would have been like my 13th school. I was moved around a lot growing up, so it was just a lot of different schools. So I could either do that or I could move in with a buddy that I worked with at the pet store that was in college that was about to move out of his place, and just kind of went on my own and was able to just commute back and forth to high school for my senior year. So at this point, I was on my own, and I had, um, so yeah, I had these two ball pythons that I still have. I had the green iguana. I had a couple box turtles. I had already lost. No, no, no. I, I, yeah, I had the Salmon tree boa for a minute until I lost it, and then my buddy had a bearded dragon. We had a pretty decent little reptile collection, and the house we lived in was a 3 bedroom, so we had each a bedroom, and then we had a little like entertainment room with the reptiles and gaming system and stuff. Um, and I guess that was about it, man. Looking back on it, I can't think of anything. Oh, I had some freshwater. I had a freshwater aquarium with like a largemouth bass and stuff like that in it. That was pretty cool.
Very cool. I mean, and how cool? I mean, how cool is that to get that experience and to be, a 17-year-old guy and kind of be self sufficient there. And of course, you're gonna set up all the cool stuff.
Yeah, I look back on it now, and I look at my boys that are that age right now. They're literally about to, they're juniors about to go into senior year, and it's just the comparison is crazy of just again just different eras, and different life experiences, obviously. Um, but yeah, I
Yeah.
was I was enjoying where I was at for sure.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And so, when was your first experience with something like a reptile expo or a show or something like that? Or is there anything in between
Oh,
that I should have asked about that I'm missing?
years later, and actually, I just remembered I did have leopard geckos back then too. I had a trio of leopard geckos, and I was actually just trying to unsuccessfully produce leopard geckos at that time, and that was back in again like '01, I guess. Um, so, and I actually produced my first leopard gecko like a year later, like in 2002, 2003. And so if you count that, I've actually been breeding leopard geckos for like 20 some years.
That's pretty cool.
That's
That's pretty cool to think about.
I don't count that though, because I was kind of like, obviously just playing around and not really knowing what I was doing. But anyway, in between that, what happened is I went in the oil field, and so I got rid of everything but my two snakes because that was the only things that my at the time fiance, now wife, she wouldn't mess with any of it, and so the snakes I was able to take care of seldom enough that they were fine whenever I was gone for a week or two. You know what I mean? Um, so when I got in the oil field, I got rid of everything that I had except for them, and so that lasted for quite a while. And then whenever my boys were, then we had kids, and whenever my twin boys were 8, I think, or maybe younger than that. Let's see, I've been, no, I guess they were younger than that. Anyway, in 2013, the boys were at a point that, so I guess they were 5. They were at a point that they were old enough to start helping a little bit, and so I got leopard geckos again. I got a trio of leopard geckos from PetSmart or Petco, and that was the beginning of me getting into gecko breeding. Was in 2013 when I got those. And it wasn't until about 2 years later, a year later, that I went to my first expo ever. So that's the thing is my whole entry into the reptile scene was kind of weird the way it happened because I jumped in as the pet store employee and did that for several years and then was not at the pet store but still keeping for quite a while. And then when I got in the oil field, in 2005, I think 2006, I got rid of everything. So it was kind of a reset. And then right after I got leopard geckos and started breeding them, I kind of discovered the whole scene of higher end, that there were different tiers of breeding and that what I had was not really worth anything because it was Petco animals. And so that was my realization that there was this whole other world that I didn't even know about. Right. And so that's when I went to my first expo after doing quite a bit of research and deciding that I was going to, start breeding leopard geckos. And the original plan was I was going to breed leopard geckos and ball pythons. I was watching a bunch of like Brian Barczyk original stuff and Matt Baranek, Sasselbeck Reptiles original stuff. And that was my determination is I was going to do leopard geckos and ball pythons. And I went to my very first expo. So this is in 2014. I went to my first expo, and there were like 5 or 6. It was a little bitty expo, a little. Well, you're very familiar with it. Actually, it was It was the one when it was in Garden Ridge.
Okay. Is there?
Um, and I walked in there, and there was like 5 or 6 ball python vendors and one leopard gecko vendor. And I made I made a decision right then and there that I was not going to continue with my plan of breeding ball pythons because that looked like an already oversaturated market. And looking back, I'm so thankful I made that decision. um, and so I decided just to go with leopard geckos, and I bought my first breeder quality leopard geckos at that expo. So that was kind of the beginning of where we're at now. That was, let's see, we're in 26 now, so that was what, 12 years ago?
Yes, sir. Yeah. No, that's so interesting, right? And kind of those little decisions in life that you make that you turn left and right, and
Yeah,
then where it takes you, and
yeah.
for reptiles and that passion to be that underlying toe there. It's so interesting how often you speak to people and they don't have a hobby. This is something that's come up a couple times, and what a weird thing, where it's just
Right.
like what do you do? you know
Well, I've also met a lot of people in the industry that weirdly enough, like, and it's usually it's the usual suspect, right? It's the people that you would expect this to be their story. Like, they weren't actually into reptiles all their life. They just got into reptiles because they realized they could make money off of reptiles. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you can spot them a mile away. You know what I mean? Um, and so anyway, there's many different characters to weed through in this world, just like everywhere else. You know,
Yeah. But the reptile hobby's an interesting one for sure.
for sure.
And I've always kind of antiquated it to, if there's ever a convention I'm going to and there's a happens to be a wedding convention on the right side and a snake show on the left side, well, I know the line of people that I have to go stand in. And and it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing at all, but I know the crowd, and it's an interesting one and a diverse one. There's
Dude,
all types of people in this hobby.
you know, we actually had that exact situation at the shirt show a while back. You know how they used to get only half of that building at the shirts venue?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
One time they had a wedding reception on the opposite side the
There you
same day.
go. Well, that was always a theoretical thing I thought about, and I'm sure it was my experience going to those shows. And kind of that weird, that and roasted nuts. That's when I think of snake shows. I think of that smell.
That's a weird memory.
I
Why?
just
Did you get roasted nuts at them?
No, I just feel like they had them at the entrances all the time. There'd be someone with like, different,
Huh.
candy coated nuts.
Okay.
I don't really go to snake shows, but I remember that being a thing. I don't go to many nowadays. uh, that's so funny. Well, no, yeah, and so what from when you got out of it to when you got back into it, what were some of the kind of changes that you noticed?
Well, again, my my quote unquote in in the first place was a very limited capacity. You know what I mean? Like, I was very involved with learning and teaching and taking care of the animals that I had on hand at the two stores that I worked at. But I wasn't, like, again, I wasn't going to expos. I wasn't online at all with it. I wasn't really involved in the community at all at that point. I was just kind of doing my own thing with it, right? And then again, after I stopped working at the stores, then I was just really doing my own thing with my collection and just had, like, just one friend really that was in reptiles. And then got in the oil field, did the oil field for a good while, and then again when I got back into it, it was kind of my first entry into the industry, or the community rather. You know what I mean? Like, my whenever I was in high school and working at the pet stores, it was a very limited capacity as far as the involvement of outside of dealing with the customers at the stores. You know what I mean?
Yes, sir.
Um, so that's kind of how I would say that. Like, it was kind of a whole new thing for me whenever I got in with the geckos 12
Yes,
years
sir.
ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, So all basically all of my connections that I have are from that point until now is what I'm getting at. I don't have any really acquaintances or friends or other than my best friend that I'm still really good friends with. I don't really have anybody from that world in the first phase or era of me keeping.
Yes, sir. Yeah. But even too, what about like any remembrance of like equipment that was available? And because like that's something you brought up early on was talking about the custom enclosure that you had built and kind of giving you that idea and not to jump forward, but where you are now and different aspects of what you're doing. That those influences were there, and so maybe you're a little bit more aware of it. Is there anything that stands out to you about technology that was available maybe when you came back in that was like, oh, that's cool to see that?
Um, yeah, I guess so, but again, I came back in on such a different level though than what I was whenever I got out. You know what I mean? Because I came back in a research mode of like I'm gonna do this, and initially I was keeping them exactly like I used to before, just a big 40-gallon full of sand and an under tank heater blasting way too hot, and you know typical old school leopard gecko keeping.
Yeah,
And then once I decided I was gonna breed, then I started researching and realized that there's different ways of doing things and kind of got on that mindset.
that's right.
Um, so it's kind of hard to compare it honestly, because again, even with the equipment and stuff, I wasn't using the same kind of stuff really. It was just super basic.
Yeah, no, that does make sense, and that does make sense. I didn't necessarily think about it like that, right? If you go, well, I just came back in doing what I was doing, and then said, oh look, there's all
Yeah,
these systems that are available. I guess that would
yeah.
be
I
kind of
mean,
like, yeah, no, it changed.
I've lost less animals. I
Yes,
haven't had
yeah.
as many escapees, and I feel like I've definitely had more success rates. Um, but yeah, it's just a whole different way of looking at it, really.
Yeah, no, completely, completely. And that's very so then just jumping right back into it and getting those animals where you said, "Hey, this is the shift that we're making with a game plan here." What were those animals and what was that like to get to see those first eggs hatch ultimately?
Oh, dude, it was awesome, man. That it was, keep in mind it was strictly a hobby at this point. It was just something that I was doing with my boys as kind of a, science project kind of thing is what it started out as. And yeah, like I said, we got the trio from Petco, and I can remember the very first gecko we hatched from those was a blizzard. And so, I had two normal geckos, and they hatched out this basically, leucistic, if you will. It's a solid white gecko with a purple head and black eyes, Um, and it was just, I thought I had something crazy, right? Because I didn't know anything. I didn't know at this point that the geckos that I was working with were no genetic knowledge, so they weren't really worth anything in the hobby. And also that what I hatched, I thought was something new, and it wasn't. It was just a gene that was being produced, right? And so I can remember that feeling of just like total elatement and joy, and thinking that I was just, on top of the world. And then, I remember the first time I brought her to that first expo, like like people shouldn't do, and showed her to that leopard gecko breeder that I was talking to, and I was like, look, man, I hatched this from these. What do you think I should breed her to? And he was like, nothing. And I was like, he broke my heart, right? I was like, what? And so that's when I learned about the whole genetic, lineage, and the fact that it matters with leopard geckos and all that. And so, like I said, I got my first couple geckos from him, and that's uh that's Sean, who I've been for now. He runs expos now. Um, but the first couple geckos I got from him was a bold stripe and a chirper albino, and I still have bold stripes to this day that have some of that lineage from that gecko in it. Um, And yeah, it was the first. I can remember that first gecko, and then I remember I think we hatched like a dozen geckos that first year. Yeah, for sure we hatched a dozen that first year, and it was every single gecko was just a challenge to just keep alive at that point. Really, you don't know what you're doing. You've done research, but you haven't done it yet. Or done it enough times for you to be confident with it. And it was just yeah, it was exciting and scary and all that all at once. But then it got easier each year, and again we started hatching actual, like, legit leopard geckos, quote unquote, that had more of a market value, because the first ones we were hatching, you have to basically give them away, which I hate doing. And I don't do, because it makes them basically just a disposable pet to some people, right? And that's not what I'm working towards.
Yes, sir.
Um, but yeah, it was definitely a fun experience, those first couple, and but it never gets old, man. Even thousands of geckos later, every single one is like a Christmas morning wake up. You never know what's gonna hatch out of that egg, even if you know what you should expect. There's still stuff to throw you for a loop.
Yeah. Well, no, and that point you just made is one that I compare to hatching eggs like that. It's an adult Christmas
Yeah,
where if you kind of sit there and think about what it was like as a little kid on Christmas morning, walking into the living room and just being like, right, like, oh, Santa was here, and that like craziness of that feeling, and
it,
then to now be an adult, that's a really hard feeling to get back and to experience again. And hatching eggs and field herping are two ways that I feel like an adult can experience that.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, no, what a cool feeling. It is a super cool feeling. And for you to kind of explain it that same way, I appreciate that. Well, very cool. And, so looking at, kind of reptiles in the way of a form of art, and them kind of moving forward, um, what are some of the projects? I know that you have a really cool looking, and correct me if I'm wrong here, a line of leopard gecko, or of a leopard geckos, a fat tail geckos, black velvet. Where did that kind of start from, and what made you decide to focus on that?
Um, I actually that project started out as a line breeding project for size. I had a really big fat tail gecko male that I had purchased from somebody, and I had a pretty big fat female fat tail that I purchased from somebody different. Totally different lineages, completely unrelated. Um, and one was a Oreo het patty, and one was a patty het Oreo. Patty is patternless for those that aren't familiar with fat tail terminology. Um, and so I put them together, and my goal was to produce really big geckos, because he's a big boy. I still have him. He's like 100 grams, thin, like big long gecko with big old head. And I kept two of his daughters, or their daughters, and I put them back to him. And again, my goal was big geckos, and some of the geckos that hatched from one of those pairings, from the daughters back to him. So all Oreo patties, let me back up a little bit. All Oreo patty combo fat tails hatch out pretty dark black. All of them. They all hatch out black, and then after a few sheds, they do what I call silvering out. And so they basically go from that black color to a more grayscale of like silver or gray of some degree, right? And I had these two sisters that just weren't doing that. It was only three geckos, I think, that I hatched from that pairing that year, or three females from that pairing that year. And two of them were Oreo patties and one of them was a patty. And the two Oreo patties were just staying really dark. And I was showing them to some friends of mine that aren't really into fat tails, but they were just like agreeing that that was kind of abnormal looking. And so I held them all and I put those girls back to him again. So now I'm like third gen inbreeding, right?
Mhm.
And the result from those pairings have been really astounding, dude. Like stupid dark geckos that are just jet black and staying jet black and like actually getting darker as they age. And whenever you breed them, they get a little bit darker for their first breeding and then they kind of stay there, right? Is what I've seen so far.
Very cool.
And so, yeah, it's really interesting and exciting. And I've yet to release any of them. I've got the first pair available at this point, but I'm there's other people with dark fat tails out there. I've seen a couple other people with actually black fat tails, you know, as black or nearly as black as some of these, but I've not seen anybody like actively be able to reproduce the trait in the industry so far. So that's something I'm really excited about is it seems like it's pretty reproducible in this line. It's definitely acting very much like a poly because I'll put two super dark animals together and I'll get, I mean, I haven't like really tracked a ratio of it, but I'd say roughly like 50-50 or 60-40 of like some of them are really stupid dark and some of them are silver or gray like they normally are. Like totally look like a regular Oreo patty.
Yeah.
Um, so that's really interesting to see. And also kind of just conf not confirms, but part of what I feel is important as far as like finding things like this is growing your animals out. Like so many people that breed reptiles, animals in general, but especially reptiles, so many people have a tendency to sell their hatchlings as soon as they get them on the ground and try to just have that revenue, you know, and have that money moving. It's all about the money and not paying attention to um what they're doing and why they're doing it. And you see that a lot in the hobby and the industry. And so I feel like part of if I was in that mindset, I would have sold these animals and never even caught on to this trait, you know.
Yep.
Um, and it would be long gone, and either somebody else would have found it or it would never got found. And that would be that'd be horrible in my eyes, you know. Like I'm really excited about this stuff. So,
Yeah, yeah, no.
um,
Well, no, too, and I think having that focus to put the time in and to do it, it's very interesting where it comes up where you hear different lines of animals, and maybe these people bred these animals, you know 20, 30 years ago, but it still carries their name. That's a pretty cool living statue to set in time.
right.
And it's very interesting, and it's interesting talking to people that have done it, and then people that are in the middle trying to do it, and it's cool.
Well, and to give all the credit to the animals and to Lady Luck. Again, I wasn't even trying for a color trait. I was trying for size, and this trait just popped up on me like 4 or 5 years ago. Like I have, it's not like I've been grinding on it for a decade. You know what I mean? It's like it. I was very fortunate to have it pop up, and I was very fortunate to grow my animals out enough to be able to notice it. But like I'm just not trying to take like more credit than I deserve on it. You know what I mean? Like it's just I'm excited about it, and I think that it's going to be a big thing for fat tails. I think it's going to kind of push them towards the mainstream a little bit more because people love melanistic animals for some reason. Obviously, for obvious reasons, rather. Um, but uh, anyway, I'm trying to
Capitalize on that
maintain.
moment, and
Yes,
kind of see it, and again, I understand the fact of being humble about it, and that's cool, but it's really cool to recognize it and put the time in, and it is time, right? In our finite existence, it's time and effort into reproducing another living thing and a vision that you saw. And well, yes, the animals are doing the work. You had the vision there, and that is very cool. You know, it's
Thank you.
just a, it's a, it's
Yeah,
a, it's a fun hobby.
I guess that's the word I was looking for. I'm just trying to stay humble about it because it's not, it's not any like magical thing that I've done. I didn't like think this up and put it together and like, you know what I mean, like concoct it. It just happened. So
Yeah,
I'm
I
just
get
very
it.
fortunate about it, you know.
I get it. I get it 100%. But it's cool. People that focus on anything for a long time and do it, right? And I think that's cool. You know. So that's me talking. That's not you talking. That's me talking about what I think's cool
Oh,
about it.
oh, I agree. It's
100%.
cool as fuck, bro. It's cool as fuck.
Yes, sir.
I'm very
Yes,
excited
sir.
about it. I'm trying to stay humble about it and stay grounded about it because like it's still kind of surreal. Like,
Yeah. Well, picture it in 10 years, picture it in 20 years. You know,
yeah,
at some point, hopefully, you know, we talk again in the future, and it's been 15 years, and we go, oh wow, that's super cool. You know, look at this now. This thing's crazy
for
looking,
sure.
or
But
whatever.
and the great thing about it right now is like I'm like three, four generations in, and I'm seeing no issues so far yet at all. I'm still seeing really, really robust animals, healthy, no, other than occasional underbite, which you see in fat tails all the time if the mom's vitamins aren't on point. Um, but like seeing no major issues at all that would indicate genetic depression at any point. But keep in mind, I started out with completely unrelated animals, so. And
Yeah,
I'm already working some stuff into the project to where I can kind of diversify as well.
yeah,
Um,
that's the way to do it. But also too, I mean, think about early on there with some of these species where the there wasn't as much knowledge in the hobby about what excessive inbreeding would do and defects, and they learned, but they might not have known as much at the time. And so now to be able to start to work on lines and set things aside with those mindsets, it's going to make better, robust animals over time. And again, just because of time and knowledge that we all have, it's super cool to see.
yeah, for sure. Oh, and on that note, on the thought of creativity and genetics and whatnot, I will go ahead and put that out there because you were talking about like 10 years from now, looking back and looking back on this conversation. I will go ahead and tell you, I just started the very first pairing for a project that I did have the concept in my head that is going to be, well, I'll just tell you the name of the project and you can guess what it's going to be. Red velvet.
Very cool. Very cool.
It's gonna be a red fat tail, dude. Not
Yeah.
orange, red. Like
Yeah.
brick red.
I think it's completely
So
possible. I think it's completely
we'll see.
possible, and I think that's super cool to see. And I hope to in 10 years to talk back and go, man, holy crap, that it looks like what you saw. How cool is that? Well, and it's interesting. And so from your experience of the first show you went to where you see shows now, how are how's the public changing? 'Cause I think that's such a cool part about getting to be on this side of it and doing what you're doing is you get to come in contact with a whole range of people. And I think it's a good sample size of the hobby. People that are going to invest their time to go to shows are a little bit more hardcore about it, but you get a good mix. How have you seen it change from when you first started vending to what you see now?
Mm, honestly, in all honesty, if it's a good promoter, I haven't seen much change with the people that I'm talking to. And here's what I mean by that. A good promoter is going to be constantly bringing a flood of new people into the building, right? They're going to be putting advertisements out to get brand new faces into the hobby because that's a great place for people to come and learn, right? And and get exposed to all these different species and fall in love with the hobby. Um, so on that note, if I'm dealing with a lot, which again with the species that I breed are very entry level species, so in any given building, in any given show, I'm dealing with a lot of the entry level people, right? Just like the bearded dragon breeders, and just like the ball python breeders, and hog, the people, you know what I mean?
The bread and butter
Um,
species. Yes, sir.
yeah, yeah. And so with that said, like I'm constantly dealing with brand new people. And so I haven't seen much change, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like it's constantly just newbies that I'm educating and teaching about all the fundamental stuff. And you've seen me vend before, dude. I'm not the average gecko vendor that's just out there trying to flip geckos and here, give me your money, move on. I spend a good 30 minutes with every single customer that buys a gecko from me, like totally going through everything.
Yes, sir.
Um,
Well, and that's
so
something to, again, my words, not yours. To see you out there and your energy that you keep up and that passion that shows through, how many people that you affect down the line in that kind of echo chamber and the multiplication of that as it goes on where, yeah, maybe little Jimmy doesn't get a gecko that day, but right, you connected with the family, got him thinking, okay, this isn't just such a crazy thing, and you bring that kind of joy and happiness to it, that you later lead to that kid getting their first corn snake, ball python, fat tail gecko, whatever it is.
100%.
And then where that translates to as the hobby moves forward, that's crucial, and I think you do a good job of that.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I'll tell you the mindset that I carry to facilitate that, and this is absolutely not me trying to compare myself at all. But the way that I think about it is, you and I had Steve Irwin to give us passion, right?
Yeah, yeah, no,
This
that's one of those.
generation, this generation has a bunch of fake ass YouTubers, bro. You know,
Yeah,
and so I try to be that little kid's Steve Irwin in a sense. And again, that's not me trying to compare at all. That's just like the mentality that I bring to it of like I'm out there to educate and I'm out there to share my passion with everybody I meet at the expos, and that's my goal. And I sell geckos along the way. That's a side that's gonna happen, right? That's a bonus basically. But ever since I started coming to hitting the expos with that mindset, honestly, I've had much more successful expos, really, dude, and better sales and everything. It's funny how that works, but yeah, that's where that vibe and that energy comes from, is that mentality of trying to like share my passion in a way to spark someone else's passion. You know what I mean?
yes, sir. Yeah. Well, and it's just, I feel like it comes very natural, personally, right? And so to hear it from you, it makes sense. And I get, the reptile community, it's a relatively inverted community that kind of sticks to themselves, but that passion, when you do get to start to talk about that, um, you know, it makes sense, and I think that's a good way, and I think that it leads towards, you know, the average person maybe not, cutting the snake's head off, when they see it, and just
Right.
again that multiplication factor of that, and and I think it's an overall just kind of better acceptance of reptiles over time, and I hope it gets better as we keep going.
100%, dude.
Yeah, no, very cool, very cool. And so,
Actually, I will add a little bit because you asked what I've seen change in the years that I've been vending. I am seeing more educated uh, customers. I will say that, or people more willing to accept instruction, if that makes sense,
yes, sir, yeah. No, that's
which
definitely
I think is
something
a good
that,
thing.
yeah, no, I think that, that would echo kind of what I've seen. And again, it's a double-edged sword where the wealth of knowledge that's out there sometimes is not the best, but if people are interested enough to do the research, there is good information out there, and and I think that's important. And yeah, I would expect to start to see changes in the average community coming in overall where we are now.
Absolutely.
Very cool. Well, as we start to wind down, where do you see the hobby going from what you're seeing now? Where are the trends, and what do you think where it's going to be in the next
Um,
5, 10 years?
I think that it's going in a positive direction overall. I think that there's a lot of fear mongering out there of people, obviously it's a bad look when we have people being irresponsible and that's in the public eye, and I'm definitely a huge advocate against that. Um, but overall, I feel like there's a lot more people with the same mindset as you and I of wanting to educate and just, introduce others to what we love about these guys, about these animals. And so I think overall it's going to continue to be a more educated and more mindful approach. And I think a lot more people are going into more like sizable enclosures and more naturalistic setups. That's one thing, as you know, that I do a lot of is like building bioactives for my own collection and for customers. Um, and I think that that's obviously a good thing. I think that people are learning more and more about the animals' behaviors and what makes them tick and what is just surviving and what is thriving. And I'm still guilty of keeping geckos in racks. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying I'm over here like all zoo style. I've got a project in the works that's going to have me kind of 50-50 on my fat tail collection, but it's still very much in the works because life happens. Um, but yeah, I think it's going in a positive direction overall.
For
Is
sure,
is
for sure.
the the short of my rambling?
No, no, it made sense to me. And before, is there anything that I didn't ask you about, or any standouts in the hobby that kind of a story that you think is worth talking about that I should have asked you
Uh,
about that I didn't?
I actually thought about it a minute ago when we got started talking about fat tails and the black velvets. I forgot to mention how I even got into fat tails because we talked about me getting into leopard geckos. But the whole reason that I even got a fat tail in the first place is because one of my sons was obsessed with the color blue, and this actually is a cool story with the follow up of it. Okay, one of my
For sure.
sons was obsessed with the color blue, and the second reptile expo we went to when we were getting our second couple of breeder leopard geckos, um, they had one of the guys we were getting leopard geckos from had some fat tail geckos, and he was getting out of geckos altogether. And so he had really good prices on everything. And as you know, some fat tails have the color blue in their tail. And Aiden was like, "Daddy, I want that gecko that has blue on it." And I was like, "Dude, I don't know anything about fat tail. Like I've kept them in the pet store, but I don't know anything about breeding them. I've been researching leopard geckos." And the breeder was like, "Dude, they're the same," which he was lying to me. They're not the same. But he was like, they're the same breed. It's the same thing. So I was like, all right, cool, we'll do it. So I got a trio that weekend, right? And fast forward several years, and I've been breeding them for a while and talking to a buddy of mine, and I've always wondered, like that color blue, I never could put a name on it. It's not sky blue, it's not baby blue, it's like a weird color blue, right? And I was standing outside with, Craig, outside of NRBC in Arlington one night, and we were just hanging out shooting the shit, and we were talking about fat tails, and he's like, "Man, I have a picture of one of the first patternless fat tails ever collected that my importer sent me years ago." And I was like, "Dude, I really like to see that." And he pulls out his phone and finds this picture, and he hands it to me, and I was like, "Oh my God, let me see that." And I took his phone from him. I wasn't even looking at the gecko, dude. There was a stone right there next to the gecko, a little pebble that's that same color blue. Okay. And so that's a cool thing, is that that's an evolutionary, you know, adaptation for camouflage that species has evolved for. And also some morphs, which with fat tails, all but one of the all but one of the morphs come from the wild. Some morphs show a lot more blue and for a lot longer. Some of them have blue for their whole life, as opposed to other morphs, which with fat tails, a morph would indicate a locale because there are morphs from the wild, right? So that's really
Okay.
neat, is that it seems like that's a locale specific adaptation that is something that, I learned after the fact, and it's the whole reason that I even got a fat tail. And I guess now I would, definitely be considered in the top tier of fat tail breeders. So that's pretty neat evolution of the story.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that, yeah, I feel like I'd almost describe it as kind of like a royal blue, and that turns
No,
more
it's
vibrant.
stone. It's a stone blue. Now I know.
Yeah.
I saw the stone and it gave me the
Yeah.
name for it. It's stone blue, bro.
Well, it's it is such a cool, unique thing, and blue is such a cool color in reptiles, no matter what it is. For sure, for sure. Well, excellent. Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time tonight, and I enjoyed our conversation. And again, I hope we do it again in the future, and we touch base again, and see where it's at whenever that time comes.
For sure, man. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Excellent. Thank you for your time.
Let me zoom out on you here. Okay, you got a message for the time capsule?
Yeah, and it's simply this. My prediction for you is that even though you'll forget all about this in some way consciously, next summer at about this time, you'll remember to return.